We'd love to see where people are joining us from. So please go ahead and put in the chat, if you haven't already, where are you joining us from this morning? And thank you so much, Patsy, for starting the recording. This will be session will be recorded and we'll be posting it on our LESLA website so that people who are not able to currently join us will be able to. Fabulous. Looks like we have people coming from all over. I'm seeing plenty of people from North America, plenty of people joining from over in Europe and Turkey. I'm sure everybody is currently experiencing the changing of the season wherever you're at right now. All right, thank you. Could you please go to the next slide? Yeah, so just to quick reiterate, our purpose of joining together is to connect with fellow LESLA educators because we are a strong community, and as we can see, we are transnational. We are all over the world. We're going to learn about what our expert is sharing with us today. We have Maria D. Miller here to share, and we are going to also share a few LESLA updates. And yep, please just make sure that your mic is off, that you are on a mic or on mute or muted if you are not presenting. And then finally, we'll share this again at the end, but wanted to go ahead and share the Padlet. If you have any idea of different topics that you would like us to bring in presenters to do for coffee breaks, please go ahead and post these in our Padlet. We have kind of a running tally of different topics people are interested in. All right, so with that, if we want to go on to the next slide, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to our presenter who's going to be leading our coffee break today, Maria D. Miller, who has in the past week moved to a new continent and is still doing a coffee break for us. So we are so glad that she is here. Welcome, Maria. I'm going to go off camera and hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Andrea. And hello, everybody, wherever you are. Whether the sun is just rising or it's setting, I'm really, really happy to be here and share my my knowledge with everybody at LESLA. So tonight or today, we are going to look at some ideas about how we can empower, how we can guide, support, and mindfully assess our learners with the focus on our literacy learners. This presentation is one part of many that I have been doing in the past 18 months. So I will go through some of the sections a little bit quicker than the others. If you have any questions, Andrea and Rola are going to look after keeping track of them. But if there are any questions while I do the presentation, please feel free to put something in the chat and I can take a break and I can talk more about it. So without further ado, we are going to go to the next slide, which is reasons why our learners lack self-confidence. And of course, through a number of years that you've been teaching literacy learners or English as a second language learners or English for speakers of other languages learners, you know that there are a number of reasons why they are not confident. The ones that I've noticed and I worked to improve with my learners are first and foremost the cultural differences. The second one that I was always made aware of is learning disabilities or learning difficulties or different learning styles that they may be facing. And also their perspective about the teacher's authority in the classroom. So today we're going to look at some of these reasons why. After this session, I'm going to provide you with a list. I'm going to send a list to Andrea with resources that I've been using in my classroom, and that you can also use yourselves and share with the community. So like I said, there are different reasons why our learners feel not confident, the different cultural backgrounds, the different learning styles, different learning difficulties and disabilities, and the teacher is always right belief. And the one that really made it very difficult for them to go over is the last one, where they think that the teacher has the absolute power to do whatever he or she like in the classroom. So let's have a look at the first one, the first item on this list, different cultural backgrounds. And I have found this amazing picture of the culture actually represents. It's called the culture wheel. And culture is not just knowing about food and dress codes. It is much more than that. And a lot of people think that, oh, I enjoy eating Chinese food, so I know a lot about the Chinese culture, or I know why women in the Muslim world wear a scarf over their head, and I know all about it. Well, it's not as simple as that. And we all know that culture talk is about language, traditions, stories, community, values, and many, many, many more. So there are four important topics that someone who could claim to be cultural intelligent needs to know. There are four basically theories that anybody should know, or everybody who works with international students or with international workers should know about and be versed in. We're going to go very quickly over this because the purpose of this session is a little bit different. But I thought it would be interesting to know that there are a lot of studies done internationally. Canada is one of the most multicultural countries in the world, especially since the idea of bringing people in is to help them settle as opposed to integrate. So the first key component or key item is cultural knowledge. And like I said, cultural knowledge doesn't mean that you know where the country is placed on the globe or on a map, or what kind of food those people eat. It's much, much more. The second key word is mindfulness. Becoming culturally intelligent, you need to show that you understand people and you understand their point of view, you understand their perspective of things, and you try to help them adjust to the new environment. The third one is cross-cultural skills. In other words, is how you understand a gesture, a word, the look in your eye, the posture of your body in certain situations, in certain instances. And the last, which is not the least important, is communication strategies across cultures. We know that a lot of our students, when they first come to the classroom, do not want to look us in the eye for very good reasons. Some of them do not want to be asked questions in front of others. Some of them do not question the authority of the teacher. They don't point out mistakes that we sometimes make. And I have encouraged my students to actually point out any errors that they see so that we can turn that into a mini lesson. So finding the balance in a multicultural classroom has been one of my key components in my planning, not because it's just helps me teach, but it also brings confidence and respect and cooperation amongst the students in my class. And we need to understand that now more than any other times before, everything happening online, anybody can hide behind a screen, anybody can hide behind a login name and offend and hurt. That's why I always make it a point to show people that whether you are in person or in an online classroom, respect and cooperation are paramount. The second part of this presentation is really an introduction to the multiple intelligences theory. And this is something that I've been using on and off in the public system, in the ESL world, or English as a second language world, with children in the public school, and with any other kind of learning environment or training environment. So this is a theory that was introduced by Howard Gardner in the 80s. There are 7 main components of the multiple intelligences theory. And the ones that we usually use in our classrooms are the linguistic, the interpersonal, and the intrapersonal, because really our language lessons focus on building language, building understanding through vocabulary practice, grammar, syntax, and so on, but also interaction between people, interaction between the teacher and the students, and interaction between administration and the students. So just quickly, the linguistic intelligence, it involves sensitivity to spoken or written language. This is something that we all share. This is the most important, and that's why it's #1 in the list. This is the most important ability that we gain as we mature, as we grow up and mature. And this is the one that our learners struggle with the most. The lower they are on the scale of language skills, the more difficult for them it is to basically gain knowledge, confidence, and to climb up on the ladder. We are all able to speak, but in an environment where language is one of the components, we know that when someone settles, and I'm a very good example, I moved from Canada to the UK, I speak the language, but culturally I am lost because I don't know what people would want of me. I don't know what people expect of me, and so on. So the linguistic intelligence, it does not involve just learning the language, but also learning how to use that language in different contexts. The second one, I would like to continue with, just give me 1 second here because, oh, there we go. So I would like to continue by asking you a true or false question, and then we're going to stop if there are any comments or more information required. So as teachers, we can always prove that our learners know nothing. Is that a true or false? And you can put it in chat, and then Andrea or Rola can do the tally. As teachers, we can always prove that our learners know nothing.
All right, so seeing a lot of falses with a couple of truths.
Okay, well, we're going to have to talk about this because I have noticed that a number of my former colleagues did believe that our learners come here knowing nothing. And we can always prove that, but is that our role? Is that why we're there in front of them? Is that why we are teachers to people who are trying to start a new life? This is something that we would like to talk about later on in the presentation, or maybe at the end when we have the Q&A section. Okay. So here's another true or false. As teachers, we are allowed to put down, berate, and belittle our learners. After all, we are the masters of the earth. Again, true or false?
A lot of falses rolling in. Looks
Absolutely.
like everybody is saying false. Yeah.
Well, we are human, they're human. It's just a matter of us helping them find a better way of settling in, finding a better life. And we are not allowed to use their insecurities against them by berating and belittling them. This is the wrongest, I don't know if that's a word, but it's the wrongest way to help our learners deal with what they're going through. Here's another one. As teachers, we should use empathy, mindfulness, emotional intelligence, and cultural intelligence to guide our learners through the learning journey.
All right, so here I'm seeing lots and lots of truths coming in.
Perfect. And the reason this should be true is because we are here to support our learners. We are here to guide them through this very emotional journey that they have to go through. And we're here to understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how culture affects their way of reacting to different instances, different emotional stages in this journey. So let's look at some mindful assessments and look at some do's and don'ts. We all know that writing down an assessment for a student who's been struggling for many terms is very difficult because we try not to put them down. We try to show them that there's some progress, and sometimes doing it the hard way, doing the tough love kind of an assessment could backfire. So I assume that most of you are familiar with this particular proverb, word of wisdom, whatever you want to call it. It's Latin for the words fly, the written message, the written stays. So what we do is when we communicate, and we mostly communicate by sharing information, by giving instructions, by providing instructions, most of the communication is done that we do in any taken instance is non-verbal. That means we are using a certain tone of voice, eye contact or lack thereof, body movement, gesturing, body posture. But out of this, only 7% is actually words. So when we talk to someone, first we look at the body, we look at the body posture, we look at the demeanor of the person, and then we start processing the information. If you find someone who comes in with a grumpy face, with a frown on their face, with arms crossed on their chest, your first reaction will be, oh my God, what did I do? So words are very important, but they are secondary to our nonverbal communication. So the reason I wanted to show you this is because a lot of people are thinking that no, the words are more important in any type, in any kind of communication situation. Studies that have been done over the past probably 60 years have proven the exact opposite. So negative feedback, written feedback will affect learners more because you can find that report card, you can find that message somewhere and it'll bring back the memories. Most of the time, if there are negative written feedback comments, they will feel hurtful. They will bring back all those bad memories. And I was just looking through some papers the other day trying to find something, and I came across over a letter. I don't know how it came up in our baggage because everything else is packed, but I don't know how it came up into our baggage. And it was a comment, a memo that someone was sending us about how to put together the portfolio-based language assessment binder. And boy, was pointing fingers, and pointing fingers. You haven't done this, you should have done that, you should have done it this way, and you didn't, and there are going to be consequences. And this is the written message that you never want to remember. But sometimes we come across something like this, and it does affect us. Now, how can we turn the negative feedback into positive? Well, first of all, let's look at how we can how can we understand what the learner goes through when we give them negative feedback. So I have found through my research some very interesting phrases like hurtful words, thoughtless and knee-jerking responses that I think it happened a lot. Yeah. Someone asked a question, Andrea? Oh, sorry, I thought I heard something.
I think someone just unmuted for a second, so you're fine.
Oh, okay, that's fine. So all of these phrases are so damaging to our self-esteem and to our self-confidence that they do a lot of damage because they make you feel belittled. Remember the words belittled? They make you feel like you're a bad person, you cannot do anything right, and so on. So generally creates an atmosphere of tension between the teacher and the learner, lowers the self-esteem and self-trust of our learners, causes unnecessary stress and grief, and ultimately it interrupts the learning process and breaks the act of communication. So let's have a look at some examples of do's and don'ts. So this is these are some examples taken from the portfolio. I think I mentioned this, the portfolio language-based assessment that is used in the language training programs in Canada. There are a number of ways of providing feedback, positive and negative, and this is extracted actually from other teachers' binders. And to be honest, they are appalling. So I'm going to read them all. Does not have a clear understanding of, is having difficulty or finds it difficult, demonstrated the ability to perform only one task at a time, not confident in, has shown difficulty in retaining and retrieving previous, whatever it is, asks the same questions repeatedly. So although some of them may not feel very bad or very hurtful, when you give an example or when you use this over and over and over in the assessment, it will create a lot of grief, a lot of stress to the learner because they are thinking, I'm not doing anything right. Needs constant direction and guidance, is not willing to do. These are even stronger. So as you read through, they are getting even stronger. Does not display active listening skills or techniques, does not accept feedback well, challenges whomever when given directions, has a toxic influence on. So I'm going to stop for a little bit here and I'm going to ask you to comment on these. Have you ever heard something like this? Have you ever read anything like this in previous report carding or assessment of any kind of your learners?
So somebody did in the chat pointed out that one of my students says such negative things about himself. I wonder if it came from a previous teacher.
Most likely, most likely, especially if it's a lower level learner, they probably have some printout of the assessment and they go back to it and say, well, see, I can't do this because the teacher says I can't do it. And if the teacher says that I can do it, and then the second teacher says I can't do it, then there must be something true. Well, we have to be very careful when we give negative feedback, and we can give negative feedback, but it doesn't have to be harsh. It doesn't have to be pointing fingers. There may be something, there may be a reason why the person needs constant direction and guidance. There may be a reason why they challenge when given directions. It may not be, we may perceive it as challenges, but maybe they're just so desperate to understand what this is going on that they don't know it any better. They don't know how to do this any better. So what can positive feedback do to our learner self-confidence? Well, it contributes to their success and especially now in these times to our mental health. Because if you receive negative comments all the time, depression sets in, especially if you cannot communicate with anybody, if your language barrier is such that you cannot explain to the teacher that, well, this is what I meant, this is what I wanted to do. Depression sets in, and from depression is just a small step towards self-harm, all kinds of negative ideas, all kinds of violent thoughts that could happen towards themselves or could happen towards their families and friends. So here are some key feedback factors that I would like to talk about. And I found this very funny cartoon for Evaluation Day, which is so non-negative. If you look at the words, there's nothing about your performance that you need to change other than everything, that it's a negative assessment done in a positive way, if you want. So there are a number of key feedback factors. We're not going to have time today to look at every single one of them. I'm going to read them quickly, and at the end, I'm going to come back to this particular slide so that we can discuss it. So be as specific as possible, give feedback as soon as possible, talk about the learner's general progress toward the goal, give feedback at the right time, give meaningful feedback, and involve the learner in the feedback process. So out of these 6 key feedback factors, the one that is very, very important to me is number 6. I like to involve the learner in the feedback process. When we sit down and make a plan, learning plan, I always want them to realize that some things are going to take longer, some things are going to take shorter, and I want them to understand that they can't win it all in one battle. They have to set their schedules so that they make small gains towards the bigger gain at the end. The other very important, and especially in these times, the other very important factor to me is give feedback at the right time. We know that people have lost family members for different reasons. We know that learners have struggled mentally, financially, emotionally. Giving them the feedback, the negative feedback at the wrong time will only make things worse. And of course, we get to know our learners. We don't do assessments until probably half or the first third of the session or of the term. And by then we get to know our learners, and we know that something happened with this particular person, and something like this, a negative piece of comment or a negative sentence in their assessment, is going to cause even more trouble. So timing has to be such that it doesn't make things worse. So the last one, involving the learner in the process, is very important for me because it helps the learner understand the difficulties, but also be prepared to take on extra work. I was considered to be a very tough teacher. I liked to challenge my learners all the time. And I would take this with great pleasure because I know that I'm a challenging teacher. I know that I like to challenge my students, but I never asked them to do more than I think they are able to do. And in the end, they all said, oh, I never thought of this. I never thought that I could actually do that. You don't know until you actually try. And failure is part of the learning process. That's what I've tried to teach all my learners. Failure is part of the process. And I always came up with examples of my own learning, because really what we need to do is show them that we are also human. And just like them, we learn certain things. And I learned English just like they did, only for a longer period of time. English is not my first language. But when they hear that, they say, oh, so then maybe I can do that. And the answer is yes, you can do whatever you set your mind to do if you keep working as hard as you can. So this particular factor I found to be very motivating. And when you give praise in front of everybody, you feel their hearts growing. You see their faces brightening up. They're so proud of themselves. They pat each other on the back. But when you give them negative feedback in front of others, that's when you basically put them down. You stomp on their pride. You stomp on their individualities, and that's the wrong way to do. I've witnessed this, unfortunately, too many times. I cannot believe that some of my former colleagues were happy to put people down in front of everybody else. Oh, sorry. So how can we express lack of progress using positive feedback? Well, one way of doing it is using positive reinforcement. But what we're going to talk about today is just looking at the words we use. So on the left-hand side of your screen, there are those negative comments. And then on the right-hand side are some positive comments. They both show that the person does not progress, but the way we use words makes such a big difference. So does not have a clear understanding of could be that they need more or extra support or extra help to understand or follow directions. And it's nothing wrong, absolutely nothing wrong with someone needing more support or more time to understand, to follow directions. Is having difficulty or finds it difficult to do things. Well, they are successful they're successful in doing things at their own pace. You can do certain things in different ways. Demonstrates the ability to perform only one task at a time. Well, multitasking is overrated because we know that when you multitask, you don't actually do any of the tasks very well, unless you are like a super genius like Einstein or who knows, Shakespeare. So what I would say is successful in completing the assigned task, learning to multitask, because that's what we're actually teaching them, to do two things at a time. But you can't really do two things at a time because our brains are not programmed for that. A computer can do two things at a time, but there are different kinds of machines. And the last one, not confident in, maybe they need more time or they need to learn how to trust themselves more. Has shown difficulty retaining and retrieving previous information. Maybe they need more time to practice or to learn, or maybe they need to process, they need more time to process the information that they learn. Ask the same questions repeatedly. Well, if anybody has the courage to ask the teacher the same question 5 times, they're my hero. Because I ask sometimes for clarification and they laugh at me. Oh, you didn't get it the first time. Well, maybe you're not clear enough the first time. Let's look at this from their perspective. We are talking sometimes so fast. We're using such fancy words a lot of times that they get stuck on one word and they just lose everything that comes after. So asking, being brave enough to ask the same question several times does not bother me at all. And there is no such thing as a stupid question in my book. Needs constant direction and guidance. Well, maybe they want some guidance. Maybe they want to work one-on-one because that's how they feel they can do things properly. Maybe they want to have someone telling them that they're doing the right thing more often than others. I don't see anything wrong with this. Is not willing to do whatever. Well, that means their self-confidence levels are low, and then we need to build on that. We need to repair that. We need to fix it so that they trust themselves that they can do it. So as teachers, facilitators, and instructors, we are the ones that can help our learners gain confidence in what they do. We are the ones that are there for them. We are the ones that need to understand where they're coming from, because there is nobody else to help them. If we let them wander about aimlessly, if we don't give them the support, who else can give them the support? So that is for me, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. And there was a lot of good conversations happening in the chat as well.
Well, I saw it popping up and down and up and down and up and down. Yes. Yeah. Rola has her hand up.
Yes,
okay.
I think I've.
Can I stop sharing so that we can all see each other?
Yes.
Yeah,
and I can share again if it's needed.
Yeah, go ahead. We just have our wrap-up slides.
There we go. So. Much better like this.
Yeah, thank you very much first for this quite interesting and like eye-opening presentation. I think the rules and the factors that you've shared apply to all kinds of learners, but particularly to our LESLA learners, since they've got limited schooling. So even their ability to deal with feedback, particularly like negative feedback, is not going to be easy. But I think my question is, how can we really do this in practice when the learners don't know the language? Most probably the teachers don't speak the languages of all of these learners. How can they involve the learners in the feedback process? How can they share with them their plans, their goals? Because these are all, like, in my view, perfect suggestions. But I mean, how can we really practically do this in the classroom? Because that would be quite important for the teachers who are also most of the time pressured for time, resources, and things like this in the LESLA classrooms.
Well, the way I did it with my literacy learners is really sitting down and going through their examples of work. So let's say they had to do some fill in the blanks type of activity, and they had a lot of spelling errors. So what I would do based on the lesson that I provided prior to the task, I would go over the vocabulary, the spelling practice, the spelling techniques that I showed them. And you know what? Using 2-word sentences really works. And they have to be correct 2-word sentences. You cannot say me go. You have to say I go, because a lot of them, they just repeat what we say. They copy us in everything we do. And I remember 16 years ago when I did my first project with a group of women that had no education whatsoever in their first language. We would sit down and play children's games. And I know people will start jumping up and down saying, no, you cannot use children's materials with adults. Well, you can if you explain, if you show them that this is a game, and if you encourage them to help their children's or their families help in all this. What else I do, now 16 years ago, the internet was not what it is today, but now I download pictures of facial expressions. I download pictures of words. I have a great collection of flashcards with expressions, with things that are very difficult, so abstract concepts that I bring into the classroom, and then we talk about them. And then I make all kinds of faces and they laugh. And that's one way of building rapport, but also telling them that it's okay to make a mistake, because some of them are going to freak out when they see red. I don't even use red on my marking papers. When they see red, they say, oh my God, I use green, I use blue, sometimes I use yellow, and they can't see it. Teacher, no, see. What is the correct way? Teacher, I don't see. And then correcting them in a gently and mindful way makes it so much easier for them. And then they copy, like I said, they copy you in everything you do. So 2-word sentences, lots of pictures, lots of non-verbal communication, and they're going to be fine. And then they keep building and building and building until they're able to read a full sentence explaining to them what they didn't do very well. Again, positive attitude, especially with women, coming from cultures where women are not allowed to go to school. I worked with women from Afghanistan, from Sudan, from Iran, Ethiopia, Eritrea. They were coming to school because they wanted to prove themselves that they can do this. So we're there for them, and they just love us. I mean, we are their heroes in one way or another.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah,
you're welcome.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I know there, I mean, the chat keeps popping up. There must be like 10 questions, 20 questions or something. I don't know.
No, I think most people kind of agree with what you've said, and there are a lot of like thank you suggestions for like kind of like feedback and practices for feedback and involving the learners, and how learners can collaborate with others as well while working on feedback. So I think many positive comments and suggestions about how to approach this kind of mindfulness, mindful assessment. We've got a question from Paul, so I'm gonna.
Okay. Hi, Paul.
Hi, Maria. How are you? Nice to see you again.
Well, if I could share something personal,
Sure.
Paul is my very good friend that lives in Canada. We've been in touch since we moved here. And I'm so glad I can hear, I can see you, I can hear you, because we have no phone. We have no working telephone in Chester here. I just, we're so desperate. Yes.
Well, you look great, so that's good. Everything must be agreeing with you.
Yeah.
And maybe a little off topic, but still within the realm of your last comment about the gender issue. Can you talk a little bit more about gender? Because I think that's a very important issue that gets overlooked sometimes, especially, you know, the gender issues in different countries, and then coming to a country like Canada, the US, or Britain, where it's a different point of view. So if you could just talk a little bit about that, because I would think that it's more of an issue with confidence and things like that, you know, and that's such an important role as a teacher. Thanks,
Mhm.
Maria.
You're welcome. Well, what I can tell you is that I've been teaching ESL for a while, and in Canada it's called English as a second language. Worldwide is English for speakers of other languages. And I know I heard Andrea introducing people from non-English speaking countries, but it comes down to basically learning a different language other than your native language. And what I've noticed is the confidence of women in my classroom, no matter where they were from, was so much lower. The attitude of my male learners, some of my male learners towards a female teacher was sometimes frustrating, was disturbing. There were times when I had to put up with comments like, well, the students are as good as the teacher. And I'm thinking, well, I don't know where you learned or where you went to school, but that attitude that the teacher can teach you anything is wrong, because there has to be willingness. There has to be the acceptance that things are different. And if you move into another environment, there will be many ways for people to prove that you don't know anything. But as ESL teachers or SL teachers, we are not there to prove them that they know nothing. We are there to help them. And what I noticed is when you, how should I put it? Because see, I come from Canada and there's a political correctness there that I'm trying to get over a little bit. When we talk down to people, no matter if they're males or females, that creates tension. So no matter where you're from, you're an individual, and your cultural background, your background, generally speaking, should provide you with enough information to know that some things cannot be done without consequences, and that you cannot get away with being rude, unpolite. And some of my learners thought that they can actually treat women, myself included, any way they wanted and get away with it. So this gender difference between well, from different countries, or comparing gender differences in different countries is a very, very big issue that I've noticed. I have been fighting for my women students in any way that I can. And I'm going to stand up for them, because everybody is intelligent. Gender doesn't mean anything, in my opinion. You are intelligent because you are considerate, because you're mindful, because you're a person. And if you're becoming a non-person, that's when everything starts to go down the hill and people become rude and angry and insulting and so on and so forth. So in terms of teaching women in my class, I tend to be a little bit subjective, and I give them more leeway than I would to the male students. But generally speaking, I am trying to be impartial, and I stand up to bullying and to rudeness and to unprofessionalism. That's all I can say about this. I cannot take attitudes like, well, you're a woman, you can't teach me because I'm a man, and you should go and raise children and cook the meal. I am totally against this.
Yeah,
So
thanks for all that you said on that. And I do think, you know, we want to be thinking that as people are transitioning into living in new cultures, you know, this is one of the things that we should be having conversations about, because, you know, I popped in the chat, you know, what's considered rude and impolite is really culturally based. And I feel like you've brought up some really good comments when we were talking about that cultural competency and cultural awareness, that what's acceptable and considered polite in one culture might be the total opposite in another culture. So having those conversations in class about, this was rude, here's why, like in this culture, and having the courage to have those conversations, I think, is so important. So thank you for bringing that up and talking about that.
I never shied away from telling my students why something was inappropriate. I always thought I had students fighting verbally in my class, throwing bad words at each other. And then I turned that into a lesson and I said, okay, let's sit down, let's calm down and see what is wrong with this. Why did this happen? And why can't you do this ever again in my classroom? Because if you do, there will be consequences. And trust me, it never happened again. And what I would tell them, and that would be in my favor, I'm an immigrant myself, and I had to learn how to behave. And I had to go through this all by myself. I didn't know any better. But the moment I learned how to stand up to these people, I was so much better, and I was so much more trusting and self-confident, because it comes down to who's the better bully. But we all know that bullies are actually cowards.
And I also really appreciate you bringing that up, because I feel like so many times when we're talking about being Leslla teachers, there's not a lot of conversation about how do you do classroom management when there are power struggles, or when there are disagreements between students, or when difficult topics come up. You know, that's not something that we've had a lot of conversations about. So I think what you're saying is it's important to have those difficult conversations and be prepared for those difficult conversations. Because I know for myself, I'm often have been caught off guard when things happen, or when students are disagreeing. And there's one other thing that I would like to,
there's one other thing that I would like to mention. So there was a time when I had a classroom that was basically half and half. So half of them were from India and half of them were from Africa. So Ethiopia, Eritrea, and a couple from Sudan, from South Sudan. And literally, physically, they were separated. So on one side were the people from India in the Punjab, and then on the other side, there were people from Africa. And I was trying to do common activities with them. And they said, well, we won't. And I said, there's no won't in my classroom. You are here, you're in Canada, you are going to have to interact with other people from other cultures. So you have to learn it here in this sheltered environment, so that when you go out there, you know how to deal with certain things. And I get it. It's hard to tell a literacy student all of this, but listen, by show and tell, you can show them. We had potlucks, and some people wouldn't eat that because that's dirty food. And I would go get my plate and I would just fill it with everything else. And I'd say, this is absolutely delicious. Yum, yum, yum. And I would eat it, and then they would get it. But you have to be consistent. You have to be consistent and persistent, because otherwise we'll have parallel cultures.
And there's a couple comments coming in the chat from Shelley, saying that she had students, particularly female students, who would apologize for not having prior education or literacy, but then how she would point out that they have so many valuable skills.
Absolutely.
Raising families, making clothing, taking risks of coming to new countries. And then somebody had a question asking, could anyone speak a little bit about how Leslla learners are streamed during initial assessment wherever you teach? As I think being in the right class from the beginning can make a difference in confidence, but would love to hear about other people's experiences of this.
I think I'll have to pass on that question, because I can tell you what how literacy learners were streamed into classrooms, but I don't know about the Leslla. So maybe Andrea or Rola or someone else can answer that question.
Well, Rola, I see you have your hand raised. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, my hand wasn't raised for that particular comment, but I can answer this, because one of my PhD students who's actually here with us today is doing her PhD on assessment for Leslla learners, and she did some research about assessment in the UK, and the main finding is that there is no standardized assessment at this level. So institutions use different types of assessment, either the what we call like entry one here in the UK, for example. If they don't pass it, they place them in the pre-entry. They just kind of ask them sometimes, and if they know nothing or say that they know nothing, they will just put them. And I think these are their main findings, but Reem can like elaborate on this if you want. So I think you might want to chat to Reem, Dai, and get more about this. But I think one of the things I wanted to comment on, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when I go sometimes to the LESLA classes and talk to the teachers, some of the teachers express frustration, for example, that some of the female students don't like to work in groups with the male students. And then the teachers get quite annoyed that they're not kind of adapting to this new culture of that they have to work with others in the classroom. But then I find this annoying, to say the least, because for me, I don't see how working with another male student or a female student would make a difference. So why insist on imposing sometimes, and I'm not saying like all the teachers, but in some of the classes and in some of the discussions that I had with the teachers, what kind of pedagogic or educational value would it make? What kind of difference would it make if you work with another female or another male teacher, okay? We've got here, at least in the UK, and I'm assuming other, somewhere else in the world, like female only schools, special private schools that are male only or female only. And I don't see that this is gonna reduce or like minimize or underestimate the value of the education that they receive. So for me, focusing on the bigger issue that they should come to class, that they should participate, they should have self-confidence, they should improve their life skills in terms of managing their own learning, managing their own life, is much more important than actually focusing on small kind of things that really would not make the difference. And I find this is quite important when we're understanding the culture and when we're asking our students to adapt to the new environment, that we should take into consideration things that are not really that essential. That crucial.
Essential, yeah.
I agree.
I agree. Well, what I've been doing with my, if I may jump in here, what I've been doing with my literacy learners, and we had mixed classes as well. It happened once that we had just a all-female class, but what I do is I just give them time. If they don't want to work with a male, I just give them time. I let them become comfortable. Some would actually want to work with a friend, so they made a friend in the classroom, a female friend. They want to sit together. I understand that. I just give them time. What I know, and I may be wrong, but what I know and learned and I observed in my female students coming from Muslim countries is that they are not allowed to have any physical contact with males outside of their household. So perhaps that's one of the reasons they refuse to work with. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what I've observed. And that's what a lot of my female students told me. I can't go on a field trip because my husband or my brother or some male or my son doesn't come with me. So this is one of those situations when we have to adapt to their needs, because I also learned that if anything like this happens, so if they do go on a field trip or if they do interact with a male that is not of their home, there will be consequences at home. I can't have that. So I give them time, I give them space, and I let them choose. Eventually, they will become more comfortable working in a group with a male. But depending on a lot of circumstances, depending on a lot of instances where they had to deal with something like this, they will basically decide to, yes, I'm going to try it, or no, I'm not going to do this because I know better. But you're right, Rola. This is such an insignificant part of their learning. What we want them is to become confident and come to school and learn so that they can break away from that, I don't know, apprehensiveness, if I could say, and become, themselves once again.
Right,
Thank you a lot, Maria.
I'm keeping an eye on my clock. Do we have
Yep.
any last questions? I know this time has flown by.
I think I would just like to highlight the comment by Ray, since it also received like a lot of approval in the chat. And Ray, do you want to unmute and just like share your comment? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I think it's a very good comment. We've got examples of this as well here in the UK.
Hey,
hello
sorry,
everyone.
yeah, so are you, is it the farming comment? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, so both in Vermont and in Utah, we rented community gardens with my students, and they were students from mostly in Vermont, they were Congolese students. And so we went over to the garden and we tilled the soil, we planted, we managed it throughout the whole summer. People had different responsibilities, who had to go on days outside of class to water, who harvested, and then of course everyone reaped the rewards of what was coming out of the garden. And then we would take that all back to class and we would build vocabulary around the food we were growing and the processes and the different roles everybody assumed in the process. And it was so much fun. And yeah, like I said, they taught me so much about what works in the garden and what kinds of food they grew back home. And we talked about what would grow here in Vermont or there in Vermont when I was there. And so it was the perfect language experience approach topic.
Fabulous. Thank you so much for
It's
sharing,
amazing.
Ray.
I had a classroom, a full-time classroom that also liked to go out in the garden. It just happened that we had a mini garden at the school, and we would go and pick up vegetables or plant or fertilize. And boy, you can build a lot of vocabulary on that. You can build you can make a lot of nice lessons on that.
All right, so I feel like the idea of a garden is the perfect way to wrap up. So Maria, if you could go to the next slide, we'll just go ahead. We can go past this slide. We've already been doing our questions. So just reminding everybody, watch for the follow-up email with the recording and slide links, and also the link with resources, the resource links that Maria is going to share and send. I reposted the Padlet link in the chat. We will send that in the follow-up email. So if you're, wake up in the middle of the night tonight and like, oh, I have the best idea for a coffee break. This is what I really want to talk about. Go ahead. You can pop that in the Padlet at any time. We check it regularly to get ideas for what we should have conversations about in this space. We'll also be sending out announcements. So, in particular, remember, put it on your calendar next November. So about a year from now, we will be having in person, fingers crossed, we will be live in Tucson, Arizona for our next upcoming symposium. All right, so we can go to that last slide. Thank you everybody so much for coming to this coffee break. Thank you so much for Maria, who again, less than a week after a move literally across the world, came on and presented for us. We really, really appreciate that. And lots of great conversation. We already have an idea for another coffee break that came out of the chat today. So thank you everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are at in the world.